Can you hear me? I'm Phoebe. I am from Myanmar originally but currently residing in Thailand. So nice to see you all. So my research is about structural gender barriers that women face in Myanmar Spring Revolution 2021. My research aim to tackle the voices, the challenges of women in the revolution, especially women protester on the ground, the challenges and barriers they face because of the rooted culture and societal norms. So, and I did that research because I believe we need to recognize and celebrate our challenges, struggles, and resilience as well as we celebrate the bravery of and then the empowerment of women at the front line. Because in the world media and worldview, they describe about how Myanmar revolution was led by women frontliners and so on. But in order for Myanmar women to come up on that surface, it's very challenging. There are a lot of unheard stories behind it. So I would like to expose and I would like to expose that kind of stories, that part of the stories, no? And then I want to share it with because being a woman on the ground, then I have also experienced certain discriminations and challenges of being a woman, and that lead me, that inspire me, these kind of events inspire me to do that kind of research, no? This research. And yes, and in my research, I would just shorten it. I would just shorten it. In my research, it's found that the most significant findings include that women on the ground are not only mistreated by the military side, but also being mistreated by the same people in the same pro-democratic groups. So that includes that includes people in the same activist organization, like same protest groups and so on. And also at the same time, what I have found out is that people like the citizens of Myanmar, they stand up for sexual violence. They stand up with the victims. They voice out on behalf of the survivors if the sexual violence is committed by the military, not military junta. But if a sexual violence is committed by the same group of people, which is pro-democratic people, then they do not side or they do not stand up for the survivor. So these are a few of my significant findings. And another thing is, even those decision makers and policy makers, how to say, decision makers and policy makers, some of them are aware that something is needed to be done, but when the things becoming as complicated, when they don't want to touch women issues, they don't see women issue as important as other issues, and also they do not want to like put effort for others or put more efforts in order to seek justice or in order to get access to the to what it's needed to be done for survivors in the during the revolution related to ethnic groups or other related to other armed forces group. So it means that even the leaders, the activists, and then the pro-democratic leaders, policy makers, and decision makers, they want to, how to say, they want to save their face instead of saving women lives on the ground. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I have been like doing quite a few of qualitative and quantitative research for like a few years. My research is like the research uh, more like feminist because like 100% of my research participants are like the girls, like girls, women, young women. That is also one reason why my research is considered to be like feminine research. And another thing is I have been conducting lots of these serious research with young women researchers. That's why I am also encouraging the young women to do a series of research, leading and managing and guiding them to be able to conduct the research. So most of the research is related to the existing program. So we have a adolescent program, and then we are trying to support in a way it's like when there is a COVID-19 pandemic, we also did the both qualitative and quantitative research. What is going on with the girls? How are they facing the situations of COVID-19 in their community? And so the research communities are also we trying to include it as as reachable as possible. So we're trying to focus on IDP camps like IDP camps, monastic school, nunnery, so urban areas, so all the area which we can include in our study, so that we can hear what is going on from different background, different communities, different ethnicity. So what is going on there? So we can understand. And also, if there is any other possibility, if we can integrate with our existing program, we can aid something like that. And also, we trying to hear the voice of the girls, the needs of their hygiene, things like that. So if we are trying to understand what is the hygiene needs for the girl, so we also trying to understand and also make the decision depending on our research to this kind of thing. And also, so far we are trying to understand what are the girl safety and security. So we also trying to understand from this kind of study, and then sometimes we can integrate with our existing program, safety and security, things like that. So, yeah, so regarding two type of two type of research related things. Since I'm working with the young women researchers from different community, different regions, we are empowering to the girls. So they have the busy research kits, and also research itself is an important sector. So we think it's important sector. So the girls are also had the opportunity to participate, to involve, and also this is supporting for their futures. The girl can explore more about the research field and as their career out, something like that. So we are encouraging them. We are encouraging them. Also, we are hearing the voice of all the girls from every other community as reachable as possible, and depending on the issue as well. Also, we are trying to understand how the girls are defining their well-being. So from the study, we came to know, so how they define for their safety, how they imagine, how they understand about their well-being, how they define, especially something like that. So we are trying to understand, what is going on with the girl, what is the situations, and also supporting at the same time from the existing program. So yeah.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm really honored and excited to be here today. Most importantly, because I think I'm one of the few men here, and the only man talking about feminist research today. So such an honor. So because we don't have a lot of time, and I've prepared quite a few slides based on my experience of conducting research with Just Economy and Labor Institute. So I'm gonna go right into the my presentation, and as you can see, I prepare also the PowerPoint presentation, and mostly their visual aid to help us everyone understand what I'm talking about. So just a few words about this picture. The picture on the right is from the research that I led at Just Economy and Labor Institute, published in 2022, that Eileen actually mentioned. It is titled Centering the Agency of Women Workers in Thailand Platform-Based Care Economy. And in this research, we, Just Economy and Labor Institute, worked with MAP Foundation and Empower Foundation in Chiang Mai. Just an example of the action research that we did, that we worked with other labor rights organizations, and we surveyed and interviewed care workers, what we call platform-based or app-based care workers, around almost 5,000 workers in Thailand. So actually, in that research, we worked with artists who helped design illustration like this for our report, because the report addressed sensitive issues of gender-based violence, and and one of the key findings that we have from this research is that a lot of women workers, especially domestic cleaners and massage therapists, they face several forms of gender-based violence, sexual harassment at work. So my presentation today, even though it's short, I draw from my experiences and lessons from a series of research, not only from this one, that I led with the Institute in the past few years. So the agenda of my research of my presentation today is pretty straightforward. Actually, I'm following the instructions from the organizer really strictly. So they're simple, and there are three main points, right? One is, sorry, it doesn't, okay, it actually comes, right? So what does feminist research mean for me, and the significance of feminist research on labor and work from my experience, and I will try to incorporate the examples of my own research and how I did it and how we did it into my presentation. And the last one is, the organizer asked me maybe a few tips on how to make the research more feminist. Okay. Right. The first one, what does it mean to conduct feminist research? Actually, I have a hard time with the. Okay. I have three main points here, and which, three main points are concerned with perspectives or viewpoints, or to be exact, positionality of the researchers. The second one is methodology, and the last one is research questions. In my work, when I talk about feminist research, I actually am inspired by the feminist standpoint theories, which actually involve, questioning the existing power structures and hierarchy in society. So in the feminist standpoint theory, there is no outsider's perspective, and there's only a particular perspective embedded in a particular social relation. And researchers in this tradition believe that, a person's social and historical context shape what they know and understand. So the feminist standpoint theorists actually see this context as valuable perspective for contributing to knowledge. Right? It is perhaps important to know that feminist standpoint theories that emerged in the 1970s came out of the Marxist feminist tradition, or the feminist tradition, to respond the blindness, the gender blindness of the Marxist tradition. Secondly, in terms of methodology, researchers in this tradition actually knowledge from the perspective of those who have been historically marginalized and excluded. In my case, I'm talking about workers and low-income workers, right? So the feminist standpoint believe that women in marginalized socio-political positions have a unique perspective to not only to understand their own situation, but also to understand those who hold power and oppress others, or oppress women, which we include, in this case, we include men, right? So the last one, in terms of the question we asked, feminist research or researchers, in my case, our research go beyond the invisible and the false dichotomy. For example, in the research around work and labor, it is often assumed that there is a clear division or boundary between the private and public space, or leisure and work. But my research, both with trade unionists and with workers, point to the fact that only men are privileged to have leisure because of the sexual division of work at home. So the assumption that everyone has a clear division, both for example, in terms of leisure and work, both in time and place, impact the research, or the way in which the research could reproduce sexual norms or sexist norms and justify the gender normative practices. Okay, so I have to go really quickly. In my research, the significance of doing research from the feminist perspective of feminist tradition is, first of all, to promote collectivity and building power. We have used a series of action-oriented research and participatory research, which are really central to feminist research methodology. Whenever possible, we try to involve, for example, train volunteers from community-based organizations to conduct the research, to understand, for example, one research that I led with the Oxfam and a group of migrant workers organizations. We trained volunteers from the organization who work closely with fishermen along the coast to conduct the research, and most of them actually came from the same background of the fishermen or workers, the migrant workers themselves, which is the way that we empowered the volunteers. For the app-based or platform-based care workers research, we use the research as organizing tool actually to identify women workers, because at the time that we did the research, there wasn't a lot of there was no organization working to support them, and we didn't know who they were and where they were. So we used this research to identify women workers, and we used focus group interviews to bring workers together. And in the process of the research, workers found that they shared something in common in terms of grievances, in terms of the situation, and because our organization did not do the research, standalone research, right? We use the research as a stepping stone to build capacity building projects and campaign with workers later. Secondly, I think it's important to say that because of the feminist research, feminist methodology, and the feminist lens that we use, we shift the focus from the male-dominated sectors to more invisible, more feminized sector, such as the domestic work in the platform economy, that are actually not being easily seen in the public space, right? When you think about food delivery workers or riders or couriers that we see on the street, we actually did that research before, and then after that we had this realization that in order to move away from them, we need to use feminist, explicit feminist methodology, right? I actually am running out of time. I'm gonna finish here. Well, it really important point for the research labor work to kind of decenter the capitalist the capitalist ideas that prioritize wage work, right, and kind of forget about the care work and care labor that is unpaid or underpaid, and that is related to the gender normative, the gender norms that the bias norms that or the very idea of the economic theories that sees housework or care work as women work or natural or work that are naturally done performed by women. I actually have to stop here because I'm running out of time, and I'm going to stop here with a quick one, that how to be more feminist. Just to summarize my point, be critical of the mainstream perspective, often male-centric perspective, be reflective of our own positionality, and be participatory in the research process. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen, and wonderful to hear from so many of you from different perspectives. Today, I would just like to jump right in and discuss about this particular issue. And yes, as we mentioned, as Chiang Sak mentioned, it's actually always good to have men also come and talk about all these issues. So it was good to hear from him too. And I'd just like to mention that my PhD is on gender and domestic abuse in Naga society. I'm an owl from Naga from Nagaland, Naga by ethnicity and Indian by citizenship. Yeah, so I just would just like to quickly just run through this discussion. But Initially, I thought of not having a PowerPoint because this is a dialogue and it's always good to speak to each other and hear from each other. But I think I will be doing this in part. So I just like to, it could just be a, sort of a refresh, something to refresh all of us with, since most of you are working on these issues and trying to understand feminism. So yeah, I just share this with you all. So we are trying to understand feminism and trying to look at it, but today I would like to look at it more from an indigenous perspective, because here in this region, we are trying to look at how do we make feminism work, or how do we get voices from the field, how do we have it in writing, and especially in the organization that I've joined right now, we are looking at getting voices from the field, and oftentimes we find that there is a lot of data and a lot of writings of indigenous people missing. And when we are the women, we also understand the problems and why we need to raise our voice. So I would just like to speak to you all about this today. Just a minute. Just a minute. I seem to be having a bit of problem. Okay. Yeah. So when we're talking about indigenous women, we are looking at how women are seen as the protectors and custodians of cultural values and as guarantors of their people's survival. And we understand that as protectors and custodians, there is so much more need for us to have research, while we need to be in the field, in the grassroots, and we need to be hearing these voices more. And it's always important to have the perspectives of women coming from the ground. And we understand that, women in communities, we play a very crucial role in the preservation and transmission of traditional knowledge. And as we all know, in most times in societies, indigenous societies in particular, it's oral tradition that is passed on over time. And if we're looking at the context of indigenous women, or women, it could just be women in particular, we find that experiences and challenges facing indigenous women or women throughout the world are often similar. But here in this case, we're looking at indigenous women. So it can be similar in terms of poverty, human rights violations, lack of access to education, healthcare, and just basic socio-economic development. Again, when we are looking at feminist-led research, we are looking at why it is so important to have the voices of women, like here. If you can see here in this picture, these are women activists, women, young college kids, different people from different backgrounds, who are all indigenous, who are all active, learning from each other. And that's why I think it's very important to have support, it's very important to have solidarity, it's very important to have networks. And this again becomes a very interesting place, because we always learn from each other. And just in this meeting here too, I see a lot of stories which we could all relate to, we can understand, and we're all there to learn from each other. So I'm also very excited to be here in this meeting and getting to know all of you, especially in this dialogue. When we're looking at the importance of feminist research, we are trying to understand, why women experience oppression and patriarchy. And so the heart of feminist research, we go back to oppression and patriarchy. Again, I just like to mention that when we're looking at indigenous feminism, it is most times related to the post-colonial feminism, as it acknowledges the consequences of colonization of indigenous peoples and the land that we inhabit. So again, there is a slight difference here that we're also looking at. However, when we're coming to the researcher, it is the ethical responsibility and the task of the researcher to conduct research with women with the objective of social change. Sometimes this can be contested. Again, this particular line, I'm reminded of a time when I was doing my field work. I was interviewing, women who had faced a lot of abuse, and you hear these really heartbreaking stories from them, and you also feel helpless. That you are not there with the solution. You listen to them, and it really is a very painful experience. However, the point is, we listen to them, and also we write things very from a very different perspective, we understand. And it's so important that you understand the issue. You have to feel the issue, and sometimes you have to really walk the issue. So then, your research becomes even more stronger. In the context of Indigenous feminism, again, the goal of Indigenous feminism is to empower Indigenous women in the context of cultural values and priorities. Here we're looking at how do we empower women, and here again we have to also understand that as women, they are knowledge keepers. Women are seen as healers, as educators, agriculturalists, and many more different roles a woman plays in her lifetime. I use the word lifetime because I think all of us, we have different stories. We've all played different roles, and there are sometimes where just the reason that you're a woman is also questioned. Like another example, I'm just being very personal here. I had gone for a meeting and they wanted to know, why do you want to study about domestic abuse when you're not married yet? Things like that. So it's like, why do you even want to study this problem? Why you want to study about violence or ethnic cleansing that's happening? Then they'll say, you are not from this particular community. Why would you want to do this? So as women, again, you face more problems as compared to men. Men somehow, they are sort of protected by the umbrella of patriarchy. And women, you face more challenges, even for a woman to get an education. I just like to use the example of India. A man can do as many, he can go and enroll for as many courses as he wants. He can study as much as he wants. His parents would support him. But for a woman is always told, your place is in the kitchen. Why would you want to study? And when you study so much, you would go to your husband's side. So, there's always this issue that women should not, women are always curtailed by something or the other. And here it becomes important again. So when we're coming to feminist research, we are trying to understand, why do women experience oppression, patriarchy? Why does this happen? And this is the reason why we need to understand that we need to look at problems, issues from women's perspective. We need to look at intersections, and we need to understand, how do you work past problems from the ground, and how do we look at issues from, how do we walk past that? And everything is not grim. We have to look at things from a positive angle as well. Now the three, I'm just going to quickly, I hope I'm not taking too much time, Eileen. I'll just quickly run through. The three principles of feminist research is, research should contribute to women's liberation through producing knowledge that can be used by women themselves. So we have to understand that you cannot just talk about the problems. Sometimes it's very important to come with solutions and more problems, because again, when you come up with your research, it can never end. It is an endless process. It always gives room for other researchers to come and look through your research, and this will always be a base for them to go even further. So it is very important that it is that we're using knowledge that will be used by women themselves, and it should use methods of gaining knowledge that are not oppressive, and it should continuously develop a feminist critical perspective that questions dominant intellectual traditions and can reflect on its own development. And this is my last closing to you all. Here's the strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them. Thank you. And yeah, thank you all. I hope.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that very important perspective and the personal examples. It's really meaningful. First, I want to open back to the speakers if anyone has anything additional to add or respond to. And I think Phoebe, if you want to start.
For me, I haven't mentioned what is a feminist research is, no? So in my opinion, a feminist research is about, in feminist research, we tackles the issues that faced by different gender roles, but it's not limited to women but also LGBTIQ community, and sometimes even about men, no, how they experience the oppressions and the other gender-based violence. So I think it's basically about uh, exposing the voices of the oppressed and marginalized groups, and also it's challenging the patriarchy that existing inside our own culture, society, and also feminist research is about seeking answers and solutions to challenge, to demolish the inequality and injustice facing in our own society. So that's my point of view. And at the same time, to do a feminist research, we have to consider firstly we have to consider um, we have to consider the power dynamic in every event. No, who is the one that holds power, and also who are the one who is losing power or has to be submit to that kind of type of powers. And also at the same time we have to consider the different narratives and life experience, no, around the major happenings or the mainstream politics as equal stories or equal history. That means that involves maybe, for example, in Myanmar revolutions, the lives and the stories of women, wives, and how they support their husbands, sons, or father activists, no, who are leading in the political front line. So we have to consider that the happenings, the happenings that we do not consider politic as politic, you know, the things that is happening around, and the dynamic, the every dynamic that is happening related to politic as politic, and also every stories that is related to the major events of an era or a generation as a story worthy to be covered, something like that, no? And also we have to include different voices of the genders in the research, and then we have to be very careful about our methodologies, words, and questions that they should not be discriminating against a certain type of gender, no? And also we have to consider intersectionality as well, because sometimes when we do feminist research or gender research, we tend to only pick up the voices of the top women at the top, like women leaders, no, and prominent one. Sometimes that can leave out the real voices of the women on the ground. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that. So what's different when the young women or the Indigenous women or the women platform workers are engaged in the research themselves instead of just doing the research? If any of the speakers want to comment on that difference.
May I? Yeah, I just like to respond to that. Like here, when we're talking about, as I mentioned, research, I think it is very important to have young people coming and speaking. I'm just coming back to the Indigenous perspective here. Like now we have a lot of projects and we work with different people, and we always stress that the writers, the researchers, that they should be women. And so, it's always important for them to tell their stories. And when they're telling their stories, they're amplifying sometimes a lot of hurt, a lot of problems that they face over the generations. And they are giving voice to that. And that in itself is empowering and powerful to, so many other people, other communities. So I think it's very important that you don't just be a silent spectator, but you push and we lift other women up, to be leaders in their communities. And that's why it's so important to have more voices coming from women. Thank you.
Yes, and then from my study also, it's kind of surprising hearing that adolescent girl seems to be like their voice is not even able to raise in the family, in the society and all. So they have be like quite a lot of like society rules and regulations and practice and things like that. So I think, yeah, it is very important for us to understand and to let them raise their voice in a chance, yeah. And then also we can understand what is, yeah, what is their limitation, what is their worry, what is their situations in the family, also in the society. So I think it is important we could be able to understand somehow.
Just 1 second. I just want to quickly comment. I think when we're looking at communities in Asia, also oftentimes there's a lot of, it is also because of the cultural context. We give a lot of respect and to our seniors, to our elders. That many a times the younger generation, the younger persons, they're not able to speak out because they are sort of under this whole cultural norm. So it's quite difficult, and that's why when you're doing research, it's very important to also have a very strong power of observation when you go to the field, because silence is really a language. And that's why as young researchers, it is important to know what is being said by what's not being said, and that can be your cue to great research as well.
For me, a feminist research is important because when we look back to the history of farmers, there are only male historians and also male researchers that also that led to the led to forbid some part of the history, especially about women. No, but even though there are many male researchers, there were women. There were women at front lines of every revolution of the Burma in history. But the point is, by doing feminist research, we are making a history more comprehensive or inclusive. No, when we look back to our research after several years and generations, that the new generation can find out a fulfilled history of what has happened during our time in our society. So, and also it can also lead to exposing forbidden stories, and also feminist research can lead to exposing of the injustice and inequalities. From there on, we can continue doing activism informed research so that we can lead movements based on this research. We can lead revolution based on our the feminist research. So feminist research is quite important in my opinion. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, can I go now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So to answer your question briefly, I think the reason why we need to engage with the women, in my case, women workers, or the communities of workers, is actually when we think about other kinds of research, feminist research, I think is to counter traditional research that is often extractive, right? So the research that come into the communities and try to, extract that data or information and never come back to actually provide or offer any solution to the question at hand. And the feminist research is really important in the sense that it's empowered the participants of the research, right? And in the way that they are, we believe that, they are the ones who know the best about the situation of themselves, and they know the solution too. But Well, in general, in my case, the research projects are often framed as policy research, and often we believe that there are other people outside who never have, maybe in the case of worker, never set foot in the factory or do any housework, who can provide a solution for them. So, which is, I think, ridiculous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pam, you can ask a question.
Yes, hi. So I would like to thank the TLIF Center so much for organizing this, and thanks to all the speakers for such an insightful perspective for me to understand better about feminist research. So for my question, I just wonder about, like, according to your experience, how do you balance between trying to, like, liberating women from the oppression, right? And the respect for local culture? Because let's say if you go into the community and you have the mind to, like, really eradicate what you think is an oppressive culture toward young women, let's say, but then, like, maybe if you only interview young women, but you don't interview, like, elders, for example, you might not really know the, like, true meaning of the local culture. Like, for example, some local culture is there to protect women as well. So I just want to know, like, how do you balance between respecting existing local culture and by trying to, like, help women through feminist research at the same time?
Okay, any speaker who wants to answer can go ahead.
Okay, I guess it will be me. I come from a culture, I come from Nagaland in Northeast India, where, I understand exactly what you're asking and where that question is coming from. So even in my research work, so as I mentioned, there have been times where I've had to go to a different location completely. I don't understand the language, and you can see the problem. But I understand, and it's very important to understand that good research is never done overnight. It takes years, and so it also is about how do you want to put it into your writings. And with research, you have your hypothesis in mind, but most times your hypothesis can be it can be wrong, because when you go to the field, there is just so much that you're going to see, things that you never expected is there. And again, you sort of swim along with the changes. And as I mentioned earlier, when we go to another culture or a different setting, we are not going there to change the system. We are going there to observe. I say we, but I think we understand. One has to go to observe and understand and come back. And you can never get real answers, and because again, by cultural norms, by issues, there is a lot of contradiction. Sometimes it's always important in good research that you also must know the time. Say in the context, I'll just give you an example in India. If you are looking at trying to study, say, violence, domestic violence in middle class homes. In India, it's all about class structures. So you do not go home to meet the women when they are at home with their husbands or with family, but you usually must set an appointment, or you go and visit them in the afternoon when they're done with their jobs and they're sitting at home and watching television, like soap operas. That's when you sit there, and then that's the time that they are free. And so that's when you go and you converse with them, you talk to them, and then sometimes you cannot get answers at one go. You have to sort of build relationships with them, make them get comfortable with you, let them understand. Then that's how you get your answers. So you can never get answers at one go. So excellent research always takes time. It takes a lot of patience, and you have to have a lot of willpower. And there will be days when you face mental plateau. When you reach a plateau, there is nothing that you can do. You just need to detach, and again, you go back. And that's how you can make and come up with wonderful, groundbreaking research. So it's very important. And when you're looking at feminism, it's important to look at both perspectives. You need to look at the male perspective, the female perspective, and also the third gender. So we're looking at different intersectionally. You have to look at all different issues. It is not black and white anymore. So you have to put that through in your writings. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Elizabeth, we have one more question in the chat to you. I think someone just asking, you mentioned about Indigenous women, so how do you define Indigenous? So maybe you can just briefly explain how you're defining Indigenous.
I am an Indigenous person. Maybe I should show you my face. All right, so this is what an Indigenous person looks like. Okay, on a serious note, so when we're looking at what makes a person Indigenous or what makes me Indigenous, it is also because of the culture we come from, the traditions, and it is a lot different. We are looking at going back decades in history. Again, if we are going to, we're trying to understand Indigenous from different perspectives. So again, we can even go back to Native Americans, or here in Asia, we have a whole lot of Indigenous people, and Indigenous people have always faced discrimination, poverty, and they have been voiceless. But now you find that now we have empowered Indigenous people. We are supporting each other, helping each other, and we are making sure that, tradition is not lost, cultures are retained. And also in culture, you will also find that sometimes some cultures can be very repressive. It can be very, say in the context of customary laws. In our cultures, we have customary laws, which are very male-centric. So we look at it and we say that this is not female-friendly. So how do you work past that? And that's where education comes in. That's where empowerment comes in. That's where your voice comes in. So you have to bring the change, and Indigenous is about knowing your culture, and it's so important to know your roots. So I may move on, but I never forget the roots. I never forget my roots. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I know it's a complicated issue of definition, but thank you for that. And we have another question in the chat. I think the last question before or two more questions. So one question in the chat and then one question in person in Chiang Mai. So the question in the chat is Kenneth asking, wanting to know more on how we can ask, include, or invite men into feminist research. So any speakers who want to?
I think it's a good question, no? And also it's very important for men to include in a feminist research. We can include them in a way that in a sense that they are perspective. For example, they have perspective on a particular inequality issues. For example, I used to do research about gender-based violence, and then the perspectives of women and men toward the same violence case can be very different. So we actually, the question itself is a little bit confusing, no? Because a feminist research doesn't mean we only have to research about women. So in several issues, because both genders and also other genders are counter-related, so that in every feminist research, men can involve. We need their perspective. We need their endorsement. We need how they see different issues in different ways, so that we can compare how different genders works, thinks, and solve different issues and problems and challenge and experience. No, so I think it's not. We don't need to try so hard to, especially include men, but they are not as. That's not a special thing to include men in feminist research, because whenever we do research about inequality, whenever we do about gender feminist research, they should always include. They should always be in it. No, that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Phoebe. Anyone else want to say anything about including men in feminist research? Okay, so I think we're gonna have one question from the in-person group in Chiang Mai. EPU, are you guys ready to ask?
Yeah, my question is that how do you try to not bias in feminist research? For example, like
Okay.
okay. Do you think only female participants in your research, do you think you can bias in your feminist research? Because because this is only the voice of the females. So how do you try to validate your data? That's my question though. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any speakers want to take that question? So how do we ensure that we're not biased in feminist research?
Okay, if nobody is going, I'm sorry to be speaking so much, but there's always so much to talk about when we're looking at research. It's endless. Again, it also depends, I think, upon the individual, but many a time when you're doing research, it's very important to be stepping out, to be subjective, and not to let personal feelings or your emotions come too much into your subject, into the issue that you're looking at. Say, and also I can vouch for a fact that if you are studying your own community, you will definitely be biased. You will already know the question, you will already know the problem, you know everything that's in there. So most times in research also, we are always told, it is always recommended that we study something else that we are not too familiar with, because to study your own community, your own problem that is there in your community, or something that is very personal to you, you will definitely 100% be biased, and it's a very human nature. So in that context, you have to be very clinical and not get affected, and it has to come through in your writing. So it is a very difficult balance to walk, and but if you're very clear in your objective, then it's not difficult. It's not difficult at all. I hope that answers your question, Eve.
Thank you. And I think also, like some of the other speakers have mentioned, taking a feminist perspective in research does not mean only interviewing women or only looking at women, but more trying to understand the systems of gender inequality, or trying to use research as a way to empower women. So I think, yes, as Elizabeth said, it's very hard, and it's important to try to distance yourself in order to avoid your own bias, or at least be aware of what bias you might have. So I think that in all research, not only feminist research, there's a risk. Everybody already has some opinion, some identity related to the issue. So it's important to recognize that and to try to do your interviews and do your analysis from a perspective of recognizing your bias and trying to move beyond, or trying to put it separate from your research. Okay, so thank you all. I think we're gonna wrap up the panel section right now, but please don't leave. So the next part of the event tonight is the more interactive discussion section. So we want to thank all of the panelists very much for joining us. And we want to now move into the discussion group sections. So for the people on Zoom, we will open 2 breakout rooms. Breakout room number 1 will be if you want to speak in Burmese, and group number 2 will be for English. I think those are the 2 main language groups that we have here on the Zoom call. In person in Mesa and Chiang Mai, we'll have small group discussions in person. So we have some suggested discussion questions, and people in person, I think, have those to hand out as well. But feel free to talk in your groups about anything that has come up in the research. We really want this to be a space to learn from each other. So this has been really educational for us to learn from the panelists. But I think most people on this call and in the in-person events have a lot of research or other civil society experience to add their own perspective. So we wanted to make this really interactive in aiming to kind of build a community of researchers in the region who are learning from each other. So I encourage you to actively participate in the discussions. Okay, so this wraps it up for the in-person event. We'll then shut off the projection and you can just do your own discussion events.